Time now to take a look at what's been grabbing headlines around the world. I'm joined by Solange Mougin. Solange, we're hearing an awful lot about the ongoing situation in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it's treason. That is the #1 article that's trending on the website of the Chronicle, which is one of the state-run papers in Zimbabwe. In the corresponding article, the Chronicle says that General Chiwenga's moves are, quote, a quest to unconstitutionally usurp power. Now, the Herald, which is another state-run paper, has an article from the Zimbabwean youth group that's tied to President Mugabe's party. The group says that they are ready to pay with their lives. Now, to defend the president. Now, it's important to note that 77% of the Zimbabwean population is under the age of 35, so that could be an important threat. Newsday, which is one of Zimbabwe's privately owned papers, has an opinion piece entitled "Mugabe's Silence is Worrisome." The op-ed says that most Zimbabweans are unhappy with the, quote, misrule of the country under Mugabe's party, and that the political changes may be necessary, but the paper says that that going about those changes through military might is a bad idea, and that it would only lead to, quote, a further deterioration of the situation.
Okay, moving on to Syria, Solange, and a story that broke earlier in the week, but it's really only making headlines now.
Yeah, the BBC broke the story on Monday, but it's now starting to increasingly get picked up by other media. The piece is by the BBC, and it's a multi-chapter work of photographs and articles, and it basically says that there was a secret deal where 250 Islamic State group fighters and 3,500 members of their family were escorted out of Raqqa and bussed elsewhere. The BBC says there were foreign fighters in the group, and they got to take their weapons and ammunition with them. Now, the article quotes a Western coalition colonel who said, we didn't want anyone to leave. But the colonel said they left the decision up to local forces who brokered the deal, where the fighters would accept to be bussed out in exchange for an end to the fighting in Raqqa. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry has picked up a similar story, saying that U.S. forces have been helping the Islamic State group fighters to escape, except the U.S. media has debunked that claim by Moscow. In a Washington Post article, the paper shows how this image that you can see right here, the Russians say this is proof that the U.S. is helping them. Well, actually, that image comes from a video game from 2015.
Okay, and staying with Russia, its role in the US elections, that's making a lot of the papers today. We heard earlier about Jeff Sessions being quizzed before a House committee.
Yeah, for 5 hours, Jeff Sessions took questions from the House Judiciary Committee. He testified back in January, that he'd never met any Russians while working on the Trump campaign, except yesterday he changed his mind, and he said he only remembered those meetings when the media announced that he had in fact met with Russians. Now, the New York Times has an op-ed this morning that doesn't really buy Sessions' argument. In their editorial, they ask, "What else are you forgetting, Mr. Attorney General?" And they say that when Sessions says, "I've always told the truth," the Times says he could be right if you change the definitions of truth and if you change the definition of always.
And he also spoke about some of those allegations surrounding Roy Moore.
Yeah, the Attorney General said that he has no reason not to believe the young women who came out and said that as teenagers, Roy Moore had abused them. Now, the U.S. News and World Report has a cartoon about Sessions' testimony in that regard. It's called Up is Down News, and it makes fun of Sessions and the GOP for suddenly believing women and relying on the media when it comes to info on Russia. Now, the cartoon, of course, refers to the GOP's stance on women's rights and of course, on Donald Trump's administration, and they're frequently calling the mainstream media fake news. Now, Roy Moore is running for Sessions' old seat in Alabama, but the Republican Party has dropped him because of the allegations for abusing minors. The Week has come out with a cartoon about the scandal, and it says, "This is Roy Moore country," and the driver inside says, "Girls, lock your doors."
And the Huffington Post, it also has an article about his evangelical background.
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece. Roy Moore is an evangelical Protestant, and how he's treated teenagers has created a lot of coverage about how fundamentalist Christians and evangelists at times treat big age gaps in relationships. The article explains that the abuse of young women is actually common in these circles, with some citing the Bible and the age difference, for example, between Joseph and Mary.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Solange, thanks for joining us this morning.